Okay. Hey, thanks so much for coming. I'm just really delighted to see so many old friends and new friends, and friends that came from a long distance, and family. My wife Jill is here. My son Mark. You met his wife and the two kids. So we're just really excited to be back in Crestone and to be with all of you. And my name is Larry Jordan. We live in Arlington, Texas, and we spend about two months out of the year here, so it's like a second home to us.
Are we late or are you early?
I just started. Just go ahead and have a seat.
You can have this chair with this Carmen.
There's a seat back here too, Carmen.
Yes, you can have it.
Thanks so much for coming. Always good to see you, Jay. Okay, so anyway, I was in the investment banking business for about 25 years, and if you knew me 20 years ago, you wouldn't think that I would be in Colorado with a ponytail talking about spirituality. It's just been quite a journey, and you know, my business was very transactional. You know, and it was like, what are we going to do? What are they going to do? Where are we going to meet in the middle? How are we going to get this closed? And I realized as I was kind of asking all the questions that you ask in midlife that my whole life was really transactional. And then I sat down one day when I was about 50, and I said, well, how many times in my life have I done something good for someone, not because they were my family or my friends or my clients, not because I was expected to or because I had to or I was paid to do it? How many times did I just give out of my heart? And I could count like on one hand. And I thought, gosh, 50 years, how many, 200,000 days or whatever it is? And so it was really kind of a wake-up call for me. Now fast forward 10 years later, I was at my 60th birthday, and my daughter had a little, she asked everybody to write letters to me. And I had been through so much in that 10 years that the letters came in and they all said, man, you stay in touch, you relate, you really are a good friend to me. And I thought, God, they wouldn't have written that 10 years ago, they wouldn't have written it 20 years ago. And that's really where the book came from. My kids noticed the change in me and sort of said, man, what happened to you? And I said, well, I've read 1,000 books. I've had all these different experiences. I just totally reoriented, my politics and my spirituality and my personality. And I couldn't just tell you in 5 minutes. I mean, I'd have to write a darn book. And they said, well, you should write a book. And I had never thought of it before. I didn't know how to do it. I sort of did it the wrong way, I guess. I just sat down with a blank piece of paper and started on page one. But it's been a real joy. And one thing that sort of started me off as all this was happening, the planes hit the towers on 9/11, and I just thought, man, that was supposedly motivated by religion. What kind of religion, would send planes into towers? And so I started reading about Islam, really just for political reasons, not for spiritual reasons. And I concluded about 5 minutes, yeah, this is not about Islam. There's nothing in Islam that sends airplanes into buildings. And I was really taken with Islam, and particularly the Sufis, the mystics of Islam. And I was asking myself, now, why don't we have any Christian mystics? And of course we do. I spent, 50, 60 years going to church every week. Never heard about a Christian mystic. So I just read everything I could get my hands on, and I basically, one thing led to another, and pretty soon you're reading about history and philosophy and theology and science and sociology, and so it's just, and I started sort of moving the pieces around in my head. Today, I'm a follower of Jesus. I really don't, I wrote a book, and it's critical of some Christian doctrine, and I would say critical. I always end every conversation about theology with, well, you might be right. I don't think the earth was created 6,000 years ago. I don't think there was a talking snake in a garden. But you might be right. I mean, the fact is nobody knows. So I've tried to maintain that tone in the book. I also have a Zen practice. And so, one of the difficulties that I have, people say, is your book a Christian book? And I say, well, what do you mean by that? Well, does it bring people to Jesus? No, it probably doesn't. It doesn't chase anybody away from Jesus either. It really puts Jesus in I think, the light that he should be put in. And so I said, well, is it a Zen book? Well, what do you mean by that? Does it bring people to the Zendo? No, I wouldn't say it does. You know, it's just, somebody said, I get it. It's Christian, but not too Christian. It's Zen, but not too Zen. And I see, yeah, that's probably right. But it's a hard thing to pitch a book like that, because it's just very, it's an ambitious book, and it's kind of an ambiguous book, and so so I'm struggling with how to present it. It really, I think, stimulates a lot of discussion and a lot of thought, and so I'm going to kind of rip through some of the things that I learned in writing the book, in order to you know, just give you some things to chew about. And it's, the book is really more about asking questions than about answers, because, like I say, nobody really has the answers. One of the first things I did, I wrote the book in Crestone. I had a lot of the spiritual experiences at the centers in Crestone. I mentioned some of the people in Crestone, and it's really, in some ways, it's a book about Crestone. I spent some time with James O.D. here, and I was telling about the book, and he pulled the Sufi Book of Life off the shelf and said, here, open a random page. And I opened a page that said, the hand of the Lord came upon me, he brought me out by the Spirit of the Lord, sent me down in the middle of the valley, it was full of bones. On, and then it says, I will cause breath to enter you, and you shall live. And James O.D. looked me in the eye and said, your book is supposed to breathe new life into old bones. And that really motivated me. That was uppermost in my mind as I was writing the book. As I say, it's mostly about questions. One of the first things that I quote in here, Carl Jung, famous psychologist, also a mystic, wrote a book called The Red Book, and it was sort of his visions and his imaginings. And he had a conversation with a monk out in the desert, and he was asking about, well, how can you just read the Bible over and over and over? How can you just read it over and over? And the monk says, well, it's just words on a page, and you know, the words suggest different things at different times, and it has different meanings. And then the monk looks at him and says, have you ever unlearned anything? And that really, to me, was really a rifle shot. You know, have I ever unlearned anything? What did I learn, and how did I learn it, and how do I know that it was the right thing to know? So the first thing I did in the book is two sections. There's a deconstruction and there's a reconstruction. And the deconstruction really looks at everything that I thought that I knew and said, well, am I supposed to know this, or is this just something I believe? And now that I know what I know, am I still supposed to believe it? And one of the things that I did first off to kind of set the stage, because, you know, we all have assumptions based on our culture. Religion is cultural, and on our worldview. And so, you know, we have these definitional ideas about God. We think God is a person. We think he created the universe, that there's a beginning and an end, that we are people, that we have personal relationship with God. That's for our personal salvation. But in the East, there's some people who say, well, no, you may be right, but, you know, the universe is eternal. It goes through consistent, you know, collapses and expansions. God isn't everyone and everything. So if you think there was ever an original sin that separated man from God, how could that happen? God is impersonal. God's a force. So you can't have a personal relationship with God, just like you don't have a personal relationship with the ocean or the sun. You keep talking about a person. There's many people in the East that say, well, you know, yourself is a construct, and your soul, you know, it might be a fiction. You can't really point to your soul. You don't really know what your soul does. And free will may be an illusion. You know, there's a lot of things that are chemical. There's a lot of things that you do because of habit. There's a lot of things that you do because of the circumstances around you. When you look at the physics, there might have been a singularity at the beginning of the universe. Every atom might have been entangled. You may be doing something because you're entangled with somebody or someone. So So when somebody says to me, no, I know I have free will, I definitely do. I say, well, you think that you do. And you may be right. But the point is that if I wouldn't have written the first half of the book, no one would be ready to read the second half of the book, because we all assume so many things. We all have a Western, primarily Judeo-Christian philosophy. One of the quotes in the book that I really love is by Barbara Brown Taylor, who's an author who I really love. And she said something about, we use this term God like it's a steel curtain and not, and not a gauze mesh. I mean, what we don't even know what we mean. We're using words to describe the indescribable. I looked at history, and I was really surprised by a few things when I looked at my own tradition, which, like I say, I didn't know very well. The first thing is that there's a lot of people say, well, I want to go back to first century Christianity. Okay, how do you get there? First of all, if you go back and look at the history, you can pull a book off the shelf of the history of Christianity, and there's a chapter that's all about Jesus and the apostles and Paul, and we say, wow, that's pretty cool. And then you go to the second chapter, and it says, in 325, there was a council of the Catholic bishops. There's just this, there's a very important 300-year gap, and we just don't really know what happened. Now, looking back, we all say, well, my Christianity, and of course everyone has a different Christianity, my Christianity started back at the beginning. But the beginning is very different than today. The beginning was Jewish Christians. And sometimes just to show people how far off the track we are, say, who was the original leader of the Christian community after Jesus died? And Catholics say, well, of course it was Peter. And say, well, history doesn't really tell you that. Well, Paul wrote a lot of stuff. Well, he did write a lot of stuff. He founded a lot of communities, but he went somewhere else, to get his instructions. It was James. It was the brother of Jesus. Now, Catholics will say, well, he doesn't have any brothers. You may be right. James was the leader of the church for 30 years. And, that was the most important 30 years of the church, and we just don't know anything about it. There's a book in the Bible that's ascribed to James that says, faith without works is hollow. It's sort of a counterpoint to Paul. And Luther, when he was putting together the Protestant Bible, said, we need to take this thing out. Doesn't have anything to do with resurrection or grace or faith. Take it out of the Bible. Well, fortunately, it stayed in. But when you think about that was likely an early book. It was likely a very important book. It was likely very representative of the first Christianity that we all want to go back to. Original sin is a doctrine that, whether it's correct or not, has been used to beat a lot of people over the head. Original sin developed 400 years after Jesus' death, when Augustine theorized about original sin. Now, there is a section in Genesis where there was a fall, but the actual doctrine of original sin, that's going to stay with you through time, 400 years later. The Jews, it was in the Hebrew Bible, the Jews didn't really believe in original sin. So that's something that's pretty fundamental to the Christian worldview that is really not original. The Trinity was established 300 years after Jesus, also not in the Bible. And people tell me, well, it's a helpful way for me to think about God, to think about, the absolute beyond name and form, to think about the God that's immanent, also to think about the God that's relational, manifested in person. I said, well, I get all that. I think it is too. But I'm just saying, if your whole theology is hung on, no, really, there's three people, they're very distinct. It's not that helpful, for one thing. And it's really, like I say, it's not original. And I kind of caught myself one time. At the time I was attending the Disciples of Christ Church, and the disciples were formed by two guys named Stone and Campbell. And one of them was not a Trinitarian. He believed in a Unitarian God. So we were having a conversation. Somebody says, well, there has to be some litmus test for whether you're a Christian. I said, well, what would that be? God is three persons. I said, well, one of the disciples did not believe that, talking about Stone or Campbell. And they said, which of the 12? I said, well, none of the 12, come to think of it, none of the 12, because the concept really wasn't around. Similar thing with atonement. So here's, I've done the book in a book study, and one guy who's been on a long and insightful journey kind of got it. He would get to the end of the chapters, and it would say, imagine, and this is really the tone of the book. Imagine that Augustine, Tertullian, Anselm, and Aquinas were wrong, and that their theories of original sin, the Trinity, and substitutionary atonement are false. With no cosmic rift, there was no need for atonement, no reason for Jesus to die. Much of Christian theology would erode, since it is based on these theories, not on Jesus' words. It's just forcing you to say, well, yeah, how important is this to my faith? You know, is this something that I'm supposed to ground it on? When you look at the creeds that we've developed, begotten, not made, one in being with the Father, those are Greek philosophical concepts. Doesn't say anything about the wisdom that's in the parables, love your neighbor, turn the other cheek, the Beatitudes. I mean, think of a Christian creed that was the Beatitudes and the parables and not Greek philosophy. I don't really know if he was begotten, not made. I don't know if he was made, not begotten. Maybe he was neither made nor begotten, or both made and begotten. I don't know. And I'd be really hard pressed to explain how any of that matters to anybody. There are some autobiographical parts in the book, basically based on the four phases of life in the Vedic tradition. And so first, it's just you're a student, you're growing up, you're learning. And it really talks about how I grew up in a pretty conservative, pretty constrained, pretty Catholic environment where, it is the way it is and you're not supposed to question it. And I didn't really want to write an autobiography. I didn't really want to focus on myself, but I thought that there were some parts of the journey that were essential enough to relate to the story and to say, gosh, this guy did start here and end there. And gosh, this guy didn't grow up on a commune or something. He had a pretty straight and narrow upbringing. So there are four sections. There's a second section basically about my career. It's where I spent most of my life. I don't apologize for it. I did a good job. I raised a family. I have grandkids. Everything's great. Made a nice living for myself. But at one point it just wasn't enough. I sat down. Again, one of these five-figure things, and I was reading about the rich young man, and Jesus said, well, follow the commandments. Well, I try to do that. Well, be a good person. Well, I try to do that. Well, sell your stuff and follow me. And he wasn't able to do that, and most people aren't. But I was haunted by it, and whenever I thought, well, I don't know if I have enough, somebody said, well, for crying out loud, how much is enough? I mean, we live in a world where people make $2 a day and you don't think you have enough? Well, this might not be the time. Well, when is the time? It's not easy enough for you? It's not, what are you waiting for? And so we basically quit our jobs and sold our home and moved into this little tiny place. And for a while, we spent 50 hours a week volunteering, going to homeless shelters and doing, we taught school in Africa, we did taxes for poor people. We went to methadone clinics and homeless counts, and I mean, and what that does for you, you can live a life, and most people do, where you go to the same church, you go to the same school, you go to the same work, you meet all the same people. Everybody looks like you, thinks like you, talks like you, acts like you, and then you go to a homeless shelter, and it's like, oh wow, and you talk to those folks, and it says, yeah, I used to live in your neighborhood, this kind of thing. And, it's really, it's an awakening. It's an awakening. And then the last chapter that's autobiographical is about Crestone, and I'll talk about that in just a minute. So I talked some about the Gospels, and how as the Gospels went along, the idea of Jesus got a little bit more inflated, supernatural, this type of thing. I have in the middle of the book something called The Dark Night of the Soul. It's really, well, gosh, if I've come to question all these things that I always knew were right, I mean, what happened in my life? I just took down all the scaffolding of my belief system, and it's really a scary thing. Talks about that. I had some anger at one point. Had some anger at, all of my parents and my friends and my teachers and what have you. And in writing the book, I hope I'm not angry anymore, but there were parts of the book that maybe sound a little angry. Like you say to your grandkids, maybe you should use your inside voice. So, there's a comments and responses, because as I talked to people about it, I would get comments, and I was like, look, we're gonna get all the comments and questions out of the way before we start the second part, because it's really different than the first part. It's gonna be foreign to you. And really quickly, I would spend more time on this maybe if I were in Texas, because there are a lot of people in Texas that this is really foreign to. But here, I feel like there's, I'm talking about the mystics and the Eastern religions and basically the science. And if you study the mystics, there's across all traditions, across all time, there's just an experience that many of the mystics have that's very ineffable. They have a sense of oneness, a sense of connection, a sense that everything's related, God's in everyone and everything. I don't even know where my hand ends and begins. And as interesting as anything is what is not in the mystical experience. If everybody came back from mystical experience, says, I met Krishna, didn't even know who he was, but he explained it. If everybody said that, well, we'd all have to rethink our theology. We'd say, gosh, everybody's meeting Christian, we're sitting here talking about something else. But, there was no person. We were not, people in mystical experiences are not transported to another place or time. It's right in the here and now. And so that really made me think, gosh, I really need to take a harder look at the Eastern religions. So I did that. And again, most people in Crestone have at least some idea of the Eastern religions, but the idea of personhood and, is not as fundamental. God maybe being more impersonal, and impersonal not meaning uncaring or unfeeling. Well, I have an illustration of that. I was at a Zen retreat, and I was having trouble getting out of my own head. So I said, next time I go into Zendo, I'm gonna leave Larry Jordan outside the door. So, I'm gonna just see everything totally impersonally. Instead of, I feel the sun on my face, the sun is shining. And so a woman walked in the door who she had always annoyed me a little bit. I mean, I liked her and everything, but there was just this, you know what I mean? And so as soon as she walked in my impersonal self, I had this unconditional love for her. I had this sense that, wow, she's beautiful. And so what I realized is that we think that we bring our hearts into things that makes everything better, and that's not always true. That impersonality, openness, acceptance, tolerance can actually be more loving than bringing your own ego or personality into it. So, the physics. I read, most of you, or many of you, or some of you probably read the Tao of Physics. It's a book that basically ties Eastern mythology to quantum physics. And it basically says that there's a oneness, that we have energy and matter, but matter is just energy. We have a field. There's an interconnectedness. As observers, we're part of the play, so we influence what we're observing. And so all of those things sort of have a spiritual cousin. It's not that quantum physics is talking about spirituality or the spirituality is talking about quantum physics. It's the same. It's the same concept of oneness and interconnection and relatedness. That if you look at, again, the mystics, the Eastern religions, and the quantum physics, you get to the same place. I struggled with a few things in the book. One is Islam. I realize that there's a lot of people that if you say the word Islam, you're going to sort of trigger them. And so I said what I needed to say about Islam, but I didn't really pick a fight with anybody. Same with abortion. Abortion has become such a single issue to some Christians that I felt like I had to address it. And the way I addressed it was say, well, it's cultural. You know, Jews, it's in their Bible, which is part of our Bible, that life begins with your breath. There are other traditions that say life begins when you get your name, 2 or 3 weeks after you're born. In the Christian tradition, the original justification was when you got your soul. I don't really believe I have a soul. I'm not sure that you have a soul. You may be right. But, you know, to base a political or a spiritual, to write a rule for everybody based on one person's spirituality is just something that we need to think twice about. So I said that much in the book. And then at the end, I felt like, well, I have to talk about Trump. I mean, I can't write a book about spirituality and politics and religion and not talk about Trump. And so again, I didn't try to pick a fight with anybody, but I did say, you know, this guy, you know, this guy is, he's not representing anything that this book is about. He's not representing anything my spirituality is about. And there are people who said, well, I don't think you should have said that. And I said, well, I had to. You know, if you get the book, if you say, well, yeah, I mean, I think there is a oneness. I think there is a connectivity and relationship. You don't take babies away from their mothers. You know, there's just, and so again, I didn't pick a fight with people, but I sort of felt like I had to bring it home that if you read the book and say, hey, that's great, oneness, you know, interrelation, connectivity, I get it, I love it all, quantum physics, Eastern religions, how exciting. Well, did you vote for Trump? You know. And I say at the end to, again, to bring it home, what could Christianity look like that would bring me back to church? Christianity could acknowledge mysticism, looking towards a direct experience of God. Karl Rahner said, he was a theologian, Christian, the Christian of the future will be a mystic or he will not exist at all. Christianity could become comfortable with paradox and embrace the mystery, would require that we hold doctrines loosely and pursue experience rather than speculation. Christianity could recognize advances in culture, history, philosophy, science, which would require we rethink some of our ancient beliefs and practices. In coming years, we can no longer expect modern Christians to believe in global floods and talking snakes and virgin births and physical resurrections, just as eventually our forefathers no longer believed that the sun revolved around the earth. So I think there is a way forward, and it's a positive book, and it's a book that leaves room for people with different beliefs or with no beliefs. But I'm just glad I have it. It's you know, my kids wanted it, I gave it to them. It's dedicated to my grandsons who you met, and they were all impressed, even though they're young, that they were actually in a book, so that was kind of cool. And I mentioned that I had some friction with my dad, and at the end of the day, my dad said, you know, I read your book. I didn't agree with everything, but I understood it. Some of the things that we've tangled about, maybe we didn't need to tangle about, and I think the book has brought us closer. So at this point, you know, whatever happens with the book, it's all good. I mentioned it's kind of been a challenge to market the book. I'm finding out, sadly, if your name is Kardashian, you get a book deal. Otherwise, it's pretty tough. And people say, you know, if it's a really good book and you have really bad social media presence, you're probably not going to get a book deal. If you have really great social media presence, even if you have a lousy book, you'll probably get a book deal. And so, you know, I'm struggling with that a little bit. There's kind of an etiquette to who you approach and how you approach them, and there's all these questions about, you know, like I say, is it a Christian book or not? And I'm trying to find the right home. If you want to get a book deal, this is also weird. people say, where can I get your book? And I basically say, you get it out of the trunk of my car.
Yeah.
You know, if I put it up on Amazon, and I can, it's ready to go. If I put it up on Amazon, people can say, where's your book? And they'll go find it. I sold 5 or 50 or 500. Well, that's not enough. Why would I give you a book deal? So I have to really be under the radar. I have to be, I have to be selling the book even though I don't have a book, and expanding my presence even though I don't have a book, and getting people all enthused about my product even though I don't have a book. Before it's all said and done, if you want to get the widest distribution, you're talking about 5 publishers. You have to approach them with an agent. It can take 100 inquiries to get an agent, and you can inquire 100 times and not get an agent. There are some niche publishers, which I think it's a niche book. That's probably where it lands. You know, I'm gonna swing for the fence, but you know, I certainly think that maybe the book is best done by a smaller niche publisher that has more of an understanding of what I'm talking about and really sees the need. One of the ways I pitch it, you know, there are Christian writers who are writing books like Should I Still Be Christian? And there are atheist writers who are writing books like Spirituality Without Religion. And so there seems to be, you know, these folks are coming this way and these folks are coming this way, and the book has really resonated with people. I was afraid people would say, well, nobody cares what you think, or you're not a theologian, or well, that's not what I think. But most people said, gosh, you know, you left the room here, you asked interesting questions. You asked questions that I have asked myself, and many that I didn't think to ask. So it's been really cool. I did get a call from, I've sent it to some authors to see if they would endorse the book. I got a call from a guy that said, I'm on board. I got 350 Facebook followers. Tell me what you need and I'll do it. And you know, part of this process I'm learning is you do 100 things. If one of them works, you know, it can make the difference. So stuff like that's out there. I was on a call the other day. Richard Rohr, who's a progressive Catholic priest, had 3,000 people on the phone, and Brian McLaren was the principal speaker. And I had sent my book to Brian McLaren. So Brian McLaren's speaking for like 3 hours, and after he's done, you know, I get off the call and my phone just explodes. All these people are on the call and they see Brian McLaren talking, and here's my book, like right here. And I had been looking at it for 3 hours and I didn't see it. But you know, so I'm getting a little bit of traction, but it's slow. This is kind of the world premiere, so I'm just delighted that y'all could be a part of it. I'm most grateful that you're here, and you know, if anybody has any, it's meant to stimulate. So if you have any any questions or comments, or well, I don't really think of it that way, or I think of it that way, I mean, just let me know. Yeah.
Yeah, could you talk just for a minute about how important Crestone was to writing?
Oh, I meant to do that, and I said I was going to do that. I'm sorry. Yeah. So I read all these books. I said, well, I really wish that I had more experience. And you know, you're blessed here that there's an ashram, and there's a bunch of Buddhist retreat centers, and there's a Carmelite presence, and there's things that you can do here that you just can't do most places. And quite honestly, if you're driving down the road in Arlington, Texas, and you see an ashram, you're not going to pull over and walk in and ask me, so what are you doing in an ashram? You're just not going to do that. But you know, you're really blessed here that you have that presence. You have the best bookstore in the universe. I tell Carmen that every time I go. It's just I always walk out with a pile of books. You know, when we were here, we did something. So in looking for experience, I sort of Googled, you know, inner spiritual, and I got Crestone. And there was a thing called the Camino de Crestone that is off and on. I think he's still trying to do it. But William Howe took us around to all the spiritual centers. We had these discussions, met with Eric and many other people. And that really helped to put into place, you know, all the things that I'd been thinking about and reading about. We went to John Milton's Way of Nature, and you know, they have it's a sacred place. They have rock formations, and they say there's energy in these rocks, and so you know, you may be right. well, we sat around in a circle. This is not in the book, because my son said, this sounds too hokey, don't put it in a book, you sound like you're some kind of woo-woo. So he told me that 5 times, I finally took it out. But we're around a circle, we're holding hands, and somebody's got their hand on the rock. And afterwards, we put our hands down, and I didn't feel anything. And Jill said, you know, I felt this electric surge coming out of my right hand and into Susan's left. I said, really? So she said to Susan, did you feel anything? She said, do you mean that surge that came out of your right hand and into my left?
Whoa.
You know, I mean, yeah, it was something, you know. So it was puzzling to me. It just was like, wow, well, you know, I sort of understand that everything's energy, but that was really pretty potent. So then we did a sweat lodge, and someone saw a white wolf in the sweat lodge. I didn't. I lasted 20 minutes in the sweat lodge. Jill was in there for 2 hours. Somebody else saw a white wolf, and so I asked the shaman afterwards. I said, well, what is that? And he said, well, you know, everything's energy, and we all have our own ways of receiving energy, and that person received a white wolf. Somebody else might have received Krishna or the Virgin Mary, or they might have seen a cloud or a great darkness, but it's energy. You know, it just was like, okay, well that's a little more solid. You know, I've read all these books about energy, but now I'm starting to understand energy. So it just really was, Crestone's just been really an important place to us. You know, the devotion that you see at the ashram, we enjoy. I say in the book, well, I haven't been back in church. I've been in church in Crestone many times. You're really fortunate to live in a place like this, to have people that are as welcoming and as open-minded as you do, and to have the opportunity to just have the kind of experiences that we've had. So yeah, I appreciate you guys. So what else? I didn't mean to talk so long, but I know.
Do you live here now?
No, we're here 2 months out of the year.
Okay.
Our little grandsons live about 5 minutes away from us.
Okay.
So if we moved here, we'd be about 1,200 miles further from them.
Okay.
So-
Where do you live?
Arlington, Texas.
Arlington.
Yeah. But we're here for a month in April or May, and then another month in September, October. And we've really, it's kind of it's just a real respite for us to get away from, you know, our obligations at home, and just to, Jill does a lot of painting and I do a lot of writing, and we open up our doors to family and friends. So, you know, this time we had a friend from Arlington. Mark's family was up. Mark's cousin is coming down from Colorado Springs, and then we have some other friends that are coming next week. So we've sort of said, hey, this is too special to keep to ourselves. And you know, it's kind of an interesting, it's an interesting experience. And people, we've had guests that think that the earth is 6,000 years old and everybody died in a flood. And, you know, we said, well, you may be right. You know, but the way that we, you know, the Crestone experience just sort of softens people up, and they sort of think, well, yeah, okay, I see that there are other ways of thinking about things, and that's the beauty of it. Because if nobody knows, then you're not supposed to focus singly on one way.
My family lives in Duncanville.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, there are about 20 of them there now. And we were once in, I don't mean to be taking something away from you, but just a little story. We were once in Israel, and it was year 2000. And we were walking through, and of course doing what we do, and we were with students from Waxahachie. And so it was a very interesting thing. And as we were leaving, I was going on to Egypt, and my family was coming back to Texas. And my sister-in-law said, they're not strong supporters of Crestone. And my sister-in-law said, does this change your mind at all? and now do you know that you live in the town created by the devil?
Jeez.
And I thought it was a little
Wow.
rough.
Rather strong.
And I said, no, I have not changed my mind. And about Crestone. And the wonderful part was that I had a wonderful connection with our guide in Israel. And he kind of sized me up right away. You know, he said, you don't look like, it doesn't seem like you're with the rest of the people. You have no idea. But it was a very interesting thing. And I have told that story many times in that, and I tell it in a lighthearted way. And I tell it because what you were saying about being connected with how we were raised and what we knew and what we didn't know, and Crestone is a place that opens us to everything as long as we are willing to be open, you know. And I'm looking forward to reading your book.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. All right, anything else? I mean to keep people, but here as long as you, yeah.
Yeah, I like that. I'm well, somewhere between a quarter and a third of the way through the book, and it's a wonderful read. I mean, it's just really, it's really great. I love the way, you know, obviously your extensive knowledge, you know, of comparative, you know, of everything that you've read is really informative. And as somebody who was raised a Christian and then kind of have done my own around the world, you know, really exploring many different spiritual traditions. You know, there wasn't something like that, you know, to read at that point. It really just was like leaving one thing and trying another, and then feeling drawn to another. So it was really just kind of feeling my way and being led by my nose. But I really feel the benefit, you know, of a book like this and more books like this that really do invite people to broaden their scope without saying, this is wrong, this is bad, and this is right, but say, really, and that what Buddhism did for me early on was saying, don't believe it just because somebody said it or it was written down. Try it, and then see if it speaks to me. And then if it does, the direct teaching comes through. And so, you know, the ways that the more I've studied the Eastern and the Western, I begin to find more and more early texts and things where Christ and Buddha sound awfully similar. And a lot of the things that they're saying. And so at any rate, I really appreciate it. I look forward to reading more of it. But thanks for
There
your
are
effort.
more and more books where people question, but a lot of them are really angry books. And just my own personal view is that people that left the Catholic Church, and there's a lot, the Catholic Church is such an institution that they say, well, I had trouble with the Catholic Church. And somebody says, well, yeah, everyone has trouble with the Catholic Church. It's sort of an impersonal, you know. But if somebody says, but if somebody says, I left the Protestant Church, it's very personal. That minister, what he said to me in that room on that day, and so there's a lot of anger in a lot of deconstruction books. You know, the point about what I was trying to do was to say, well, certainly there's a thread here where if you squint, you see something that looks like the consensus, you know. And I did find that, like you say, Buddha and there are books, you know, the parallel sayings where they say it's Buddha. Who said it? Buddha or Jesus or Lao Tzu? You don't know. You just don't know. And there's a few things that have sort of jarred me, like Buddhism talks about the void, which is kind of a harsh word, the void. You know, what is the void? And I was talking to my good friend of mine who's a Protestant minister. He said the void, you know, that's the term in Genesis for what the universe was like before it was created, the void. And I just thought, wow, well, that's just like a magical kind of connection. One more thing on the void, because this is something I struggle with in Buddhism, emptiness. It's a word like impersonal that it doesn't sound good. And the way I think of it, it's in the book. Think about a God's eye view, where I see a person, then I see a few people interacting, then I see a community, then I see a world, then I see a solar system, then I see a universe. Keep going back and back and back until I see everything. I see all of the stars being formed and collapsing. I see all the wars that are taking place, all of the noise in it. But from a God's eye view, darkness, silence, stillness. When you see everything, you see nothing. And it's just, I try to think about things in terms of what is the God's eye view. How's a way that I can look at this, that I can see the fullness, but I can still stay centered in it. I'm not swayed. In this day and age, people say, well, how can I keep my center when there's all this, calamity and nuclear threats and wars and COVID, and it helps me to think in terms of a God's eye view. How does God see this in the very broadest perspective of place and time?
Breathing helps too.
Yeah.
Deep breath, yeah.
Well, I'm so glad you said that. My Zen teacher is a former Jesuit priest, still a practicing Catholic. He wrote a book called Healing Breath, and he talks about, in Christianity and in Buddhism, the importance of breath. Yep.
Yep.
I have one more funny story.
Go ahead.
Is it okay?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. When I was about 6, I was born and raised in Oklahoma City, and we went to the first Christian church there, mainly to see and be seen. And I was in Sunday school, and our Sunday school class was finishing, and we always sing, Jesus loves me, this I know, for the Bible tells me so. And so, I'm gonna say I was 6-ish, something like that. And so I sang the song and everything, and at the very end, I raised my little 6-year-old hand, and I said to our teacher, I said, I've never met Jesus, and I don't know if he loves me or not, because I've never even met him, and I don't know. And I said, how do you know that Jesus loves me? And she said, because the Bible tells us so. And I said, who wrote the Bible? And and she didn't answer, but fortunately it was the end of the class. And so she asked me to stay after the class. And I thought, oh boy, I'm in big trouble now, But I was 6, who cares? And so she took me to my parents. And they were in Big People's Church. She took me to my parents, and she told them what I did, And my mom and dad said, well, thank you very much for telling us, and we'll talk to Whitney. And she said, well, these are my words. I was 86th from Sunday school. And so, because she said, I know, she said that until I changed my attitude, I should probably not come back to Sunday school because I was disruptive. And so, we were driving home, my brother, who's 8 years older than I, we were in the car and everything, and I said to my mom and dad, I said, did I really do something really bad? And my dad turned around and said to me, no, honey, you did not do anything wrong. And he said, I kind of wonder who wrote the Bible. And so it was never discussed again, and I never went back to Sunday school.
Wow.
But, and when and I say this story because of how the little children are, and what they're thinking, you know, so much of the time. And it was just a very interesting little story, I think, you
Yep.
know.
Very good. Well, thank you for that.
Yeah.
So one quick thing, one thing that I really liked about the book is that it sort of cuts through some of the BS around that kind of thing. It asks the questions of, well, like if there wasn't a virgin birth, if there wasn't a resurrection, if whoever didn't do whatever, does that downplay the significance of Jesus's life or what he said or anything like that? And that was really jarring to me when I read it, because I hadn't thought of it that way. I sort of just naturally started to reject some of those things like virgin birth and some of the miracles and stuff. So I sort of threw everything out with that, instead of saying, well, you can throw some of that out and keep what you want and leave the rest. And so that was really something that struck me in the book.
Yeah, Mark was one of my real helpful critics. Read the book a few times very closely and asked a lot of good questions. It's a better book. I had a few, and Jill was another. I had a few people read the book several times, and it's a better book because of that. But yeah, we tried in there to leave room and really to find the good in all traditions. It's not a hit job on anybody.
You know, Crestone, I've been here 42 years now.
Oh, wow.
And when I first came, of course, I came with the Aspen Institute, and I met Hannah Strong, of course, and we had a wonderful conversation. And my friend, who was director of Aspen Institute here, is the one who introduced me to the area. She said, you got to meet Hannah because she's doing the work here. And so we met, and she said, you know, my vision has been to bring the major traditions of the world together and live in peaceful coexistence. And that absolutely struck with me, you know, because I really love diversity and bringing things together and living together, because we all want the same thing, basically. And when Hannah and I and we were with her grandson and a few other people going to India, and we were just chatting, and she said, you know, Whitney, think of it this way, because we were talking about her vision, and she said, think of it this way, the top of the mountain is truth, if we can agree on that, and look how many paths there are to the truth. There isn't just one path, there are many paths to the truth, and we'll go around and around and around and eventually get to the truth. And I thought that was a lovely way of exploring the possibility of just more than one way of thinking.
Right, absolutely. Good. Okay, yeah.
On that note, I'm just wondering, I haven't started your book yet.
Okay.
Nor have I, but I can hardly wait.
But I don't know if you talk about how you come to, you mentioned you chose Zen to practice and
Okay.
the Christian part is what, Catholic? You stay with that?
I wouldn't say that
Well, not really, yeah.
I really struggle. You know, I have good friends that are ministers, and I know they think like I do, and I always enjoy going to Catholic church here. But again, when people say, "Are you a Christian?" I say, "Well, what do you mean by that?" You know, when they say, "Well, you know, do you believe in?" Well, some of those, I believe in some of those things. You may be right. Now, I'm coming around to saying, well, you know what? I'm not sure that I'm supposed to let everybody else define Christianity. And I'm not sure that if everybody else says, well, to be a Christian, you know, you need to think this, I'm not sure I'm supposed to accept that. So for a while I said, no, I suppose I'm not Christian. And now I say, yeah, I'm Christian, I'm just not your kind of Christian. Probably, you know, probably. Now Zen sort of found me, just like I Googled, you know, inner spirituality. I Googled, well, who is there anything else like Crestone? And they mentioned this guy who's a former Catholic priest who's a Zen teacher. He teaches comparative religion in a university, and he's in Dallas, Texas. You know, he's 20 miles from me. So we went and found him, and he just hits the right tone for me. You know, I think there are some Zen communities that I would think it's a little too austere or a little too, you know, but he just hits the right note. And you know, what I like about it is, just like I say, this is how to fix Christianity, you know, more mystical, more paradoxical, more in tune with science and the things that we've learned in the last 2,000 years. I found all that in Zen. There's a quote at the beginning of the book that just fits the book perfectly. To study the way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to be enlightened by all things. And to be enlightened by all things is to remove the barrier between self and other. And that was written by a Zen master named Dogen. So one of the early readers in the book said, I think you should take that quote out. I said, well, why? He said, it's not a Zen book. I said, you know what? It really is a Zen book. I didn't set out to write a Zen book. I didn't know anything about Zen during the 5 or 6 years I was writing the book. But once I found Zen very late in the process, I said, this is a Zen book.
It gave you the way.
The way.
Well, and it's perfect
Exactly.
because it's that circle, right? The Zen circle. So
Yeah.
you're,
Yeah.
you know.
So yeah, that's where that came from. All right.
Yeah, I appreciate that because it's really what finds you.
Yeah.
You know? And then within on the Buddhism sect, you know, there's that personal choice as well. So whether it's free will or what, but we still kind of have some bias that's according to our background.
Yeah, things are
condition
going to work
or
for you.
something.
Right. Okay. Good. Well, again, gosh, thanks so much for coming. I really have been looking forward to this, enjoyed it.